Hello, my name is Mark Bradley from RSG. Thank you for listening today. I'll start by talking about smartphone-based surveys. One of our main businesses is creating travel simulation models to do future year policy analysis for transportation policy. And to do that, it's important to collect accurate data about what people are doing now in terms of travel and transportation. And one of the most difficult and expensive parts of these surveys is to get people to participate in the first place. And I'm not going to talk too much about that part. But once we do get people to participate, we give them a password and get them to download a smartphone app. I'm going to talk today about the RMove app that RSG created, but there are other similar apps out there. Once the person downloads the app onto their phone, it automatically runs in the background and uses all the different location-based services that the phone has. It is built to optimize battery life, not use up the battery too fast. And most importantly, automatically records their trips, when and where they start and end. And once their trips are captured on the phone, the person is notified that they have a trip survey on their phone, and they start to respond to that. First, they're shown where it is on the map, so they know which trip we're talking about. They tell us what mode they used, if it's car, which car they used in their household, where they parked. Obviously, if they used a different mode, we could ask different types of questions about that mode. Who they traveled with for that trip. Purpose, why they made that trip is a very important piece of data. And then if they have another survey, they answer that one. It's a lot less burden for the respondents to fill out this type of survey than one where they have to type in the addresses or find all the places they went on a map and remember what time they went. And also the data tends to be pretty accurate. People usually fill in these trip surveys within a couple of hours of the time that they're finished the trips, so we get pretty accurate data. They can remember the details. Of course, not everybody owns a smartphone, although in the US, this is from the latest census data, for most age groups and income groups, over 95% of adults do own a smartphone. Of course, it gets less with older age groups and a little bit with lower income groups. But as you can see, just from 2018 to 2019, the percentage has been going up, especially among the older age groups and lower income groups. But if there are different ways we offer the smartphone-based surveys, since everybody doesn't own a smartphone, we used a lot of mixed mode surveys where people who don't own a smartphone use the more traditional diary-based method, either online or by telephone. And we can ask people to use smartphone either by random selection or as an opt-in, or just without a choice. If they have a smartphone, they have to use that method. We have surveys where smartphone-based is the only method we use. Also use it as a follow-on to another survey. We have an app called FarMove, which where we leave the app on the phone for 6 months, but it only asks about trips that are about 80 kilometers or longer. So it's really to collect data about long distance travel. So since 2015, the large majority of surveys that we've done in the US have been smartphone based. And even among the few that didn't do smartphone the last time, 2 of those are switching to smartphone-based surveys for the next survey. And we also do surveys in different languages and in different countries. We've done some in the UK, and in Australia. And we also need to use different languages in the US often. And to date, as I said, we've done a lot of projects, over 2.4 million trips collected. So we've built up a lot of versions of the app and made a lot of improvements over time. There's a URL where you can learn more about it. Okay, I'll talk a little bit about the advantages and challenges of traditional diary-based surveys versus smartphone. So diary-based surveys are well known. The software to collect them has been refined over years. People are used to this kind of data, so it supports trend analysis. A challenge is that it's a lot of burden for people to remember all the addresses and times of their trips. We tend to get a lot of days where people say they didn't travel at all. We think a lot of that is what we call soft refusal, where they actually made trips but just don't feel like filling in the survey. And I think part of that is just a societal fatigue of traditional types of surveys. Whereas the smartphone surveys, people seem to be more interested in, at least to date. As I said, we tend to get 15 to 25% more trips for the smartphone surveys compared to the diary-based surveys. And it seems pretty typical that the biggest difference is among young adults, age 18 to 35. Not really sure why, but that's a consistent finding. As I said, we invite people for usually 7 days of data collection, and at least 85% provide at least 5 days of complete data with no missing data, and 70% of households complete at least 5 days. And then when you go to 7 days, it gets a little bit less. What's interesting is that the overall response rate we get for 7-day travel surveys, the smartphone-based surveys, is about the same as we get for 1-day surveys with traditional diary-based surveys. So some people might ask, why? What do you get when you just ask the same people different days of travel? Don't you get the same trips over and over again? And for most purposes, the answer is no. The number of unique trips is pretty much proportional to the number of days. People tend to change something about their trips every day. For work and school, which are more habitual, it's a little bit less, about 2.5 to 3 times as many unique trips when you do a week of survey collection. Some of our agencies do surveys every year or two, and then we sometimes recommend that they gradually shift from diary-based to smartphone-based methods so that they can do trend analysis, but still over time get more accurate data. Now I'll talk more about controlled fusion. We use that term because compared to usual passive data, the trace data we get from these surveys tends to be very complete because it's all from one app. And the active data that we're fusing it to is from the same people for the same days. So it's very controlled in the sense that we expect the data to line up with each other. And even in the age of big data, we think we're still going to need surveys for these types of analyses. One, to correct biases and validate passive data. One, which I'll talk about more, is to come up with imputation models. And a third is that with travel surveys, you really understand what people are doing and why more. So especially for new types of behavior, new travel options, you can get data on those. So the things we use imputation models for in smartphone-based data, one I'll talk about later is pre-populating answers. Some of the other ones are correcting cases where the passive traces are inconsistent with what respondents report. So someone might say they went home, but we know from the trace data that's not where their home is. Maybe it's someone else's home. Or they might say they made a walk trip, but the speed data says it's 80 miles or 80 kilometers per hour. So we can correct some of those. We also get some incomplete survey trips where people didn't provide the answers, and we can fill those in with imputed data and get more complete days of data. And also, we're thinking in the future, we can just leave the app on people's phones longer and only ask them questions during the first week or so. And then after that, impute what they've done, maybe ask them 1 or 2 questions once in a while. So all of these things will also help to develop better imputation models for big data, which we also work with. So our imputation models, trip purpose is a big one. We know certain locations, homework, school. We also know what other people in the survey said they did at the same location. And we can use point of interest data such as Google, but which doesn't seem to be as useful as you would hope in a lot of cases. Travel mode is a big one to impute. We have the speed and distance profile, how much time people spend traveling at different speeds, what modes they use for other trips, and also things like auto ownership, where transit stops are, etc. Travel party size is another thing that's important to have for modeling. And we know what the travel party size was for other trips, either before or after. If they said they picked up or dropped off passengers, that gives us a clue as to what the party size should be. And also just how many people or children are in their household and things like that. And as I said, we try to reduce respondent burden by identifying repeat trips in the data and pre-populating the answers. They can either accept them or say, no, that I changed something about this trip. And we're trying to add more of that intelligence every time we do a new release of the app. Also to deal with some of the cases where, say, the state reported purpose doesn't agree with the location, and we can catch that real time instead of having to deal with it in imputation later. So that's all I have for today. Thank you for listening.